The Witch's Cabin. Nestled deep within the hemlock woods lies an old, rotting cabin, hidden from view and covered in creeping vines. Most people in town had only heard whispers of it, stories passed down like a dark inheritance. They said it was the place of Morgana Gray, the town's very own witch from centuries past. Children would dare each other to venture near it, though few ever did, and none were foolish enough to go inside. But the cabin had an undeniable lure, one that pulled at people like a thread too long to ignore. And for Clara Roberts, a new resident in town, curiosity soon got the better of her. Clara was a freelance photographer, fresh from the city and drawn to the rural landscape, hoping to capture something unique. The woods behind her new home fascinated her, and when she heard the rumors about the witch's cabin, she couldn't resist. Armed with her camera, she set out one chilly autumn morning, her breath hanging in the air like mist. The further she walked into the woods, the quieter it became, the thick canopy of trees blocking out the sun until it seemed almost like twilight. Finally, she saw it, tucked away, crooked and slouched in decay. The cabin had an air of loneliness and malice, as if it had been waiting, watching the years roll by. Clara approached slowly, her camera ready. The outside was overgrown, with weeds and brambles so thick they nearly covered the windows. The door hung ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze, and as she got closer, she noticed strange symbols carved into the wood around the frame, twisted, looping symbols that made her stomach churn. Ignoring the uneasy feeling, Clara pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust, and something else, something faintly metallic. The walls were lined with shelves, each one packed with jars of strange objects, dried herbs, small bones, and dark liquids that shimmered in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows. Old spell books lay open on a table, their pages cracked and yellowed with age. But it was the drawings on the walls that truly caught Clara's attention. They were rough and frantic, like they'd been scratched on the walls in desperation. They depicted figures surrounded by shadows, some hunched and others writhing. At the center of each drawing was a woman with dark, hollow eyes, a figure Clara assumed was Morgana herself. Clara raised her camera, snapping photos as she moved through the cabin. But every picture felt wrong, like her camera was distorting the images, making them darker, more sinister. And then she noticed something chilling. Behind her in the viewfinder, shadows seemed to shift and move, almost as if they were alive. A chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off. This was just an old cabin, an abandoned relic from a time when superstition ran rampant. She continued to explore, moving toward a door at the back of the cabin, a door that seemed somehow darker, more foreboding than the rest. Without thinking, she turned the knob and pushed it open. Inside was a small, windowless room, lit only by the faint glow of candle stubs arranged in a circle on the floor. In the center lay a large, dark stain on the wooden planks, one that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Clara's heart pounded as she took a step back. The air felt thick, pressing down on her, and suddenly the room felt smaller, suffocating. She turned to leave, but as she did, she heard it, a faint whisper, soft and almost tender. Clara. She froze. Her name echoed through the room, but she was alone. Or at least she thought she was. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin. But as she moved back toward the front door, the whisper grew louder, more insistent, repeating her name with a strange, sing-song quality. Clara bolted out of the cabin, her heart racing. Outside, she gulped down fresh air, her hands shaking. She glanced back, and for a moment, she thought she saw a figure in the window, a woman with hollow, black eyes staring back at her. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over her own feet as she fled. The image burned into her mind. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure, felt her gaze burning through her. She tried to forget it, to brush it off as a trick of the mind, but deep down, she knew something had followed her back from that cabin. Over the next few days, strange things began happening around her home. She'd wake up to find her camera turned on, photos of her sleeping filling the memory card. Dark, blurred images of her room at night, taken from angles that should have been impossible. One morning, she found a scratch on her arm, a deep, jagged line that burned as if it had been seared into her skin. She tried to ignore it, but the whispers began soon after, soft at first, like a breeze, but growing louder and more persistent each night. "Come back, Clara." The voice called to her, growing more demanding with each passing night. She started hearing footsteps in her home, shadows that moved at the edge of her vision. And always that voice, beckoning her, tempting her back to the cabin. Finally, driven to the brink, she decided to return. Maybe she could put an end to this nightmare, find some closure. She grabbed her camera, a flashlight, and headed into the woods, her heart pounding with each step. As she approached the cabin, the air grew colder, heavier, and she felt a suffocating pressure bearing down on her. The door was open, as if waiting for her. Inside, the cabin was exactly as she had left it. But as she stepped inside, she felt a presence, a dark, malevolent force that wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into the room. She tried to turn, to flee, but her legs felt like lead, her body refusing to obey. And then she saw her, Morgana, standing in the shadows, her hollow eyes boring into Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You shouldn't have come back," Morgana whispered, her voice a raspy echo. "But now you'll never leave." Clara felt an icy hand grip her wrist, pulling her deeper into the cabin. She screamed, struggling, but the hand was unyielding, dragging her toward the back room, toward the dark stain on the floor. As she was pulled inside, the door slammed shut behind her, and the darkness swallowed her whole. Days passed, then weeks. Clara's house remained empty, her belongings untouched. The townsfolk whispered about her disappearance, about the camera they found near the edge of the woods, filled with dark, blurry images that no one could make sense of. And the cabin waited, its door ajar, shadows shifting and twisting within. And sometimes, if you dared to go near it, you might hear a voice, soft, pleading, calling for help. A voice that sounded eerily like Clara's, trapped forever in the cabin of the witch.